Hello, this is Matthew Rivaldi from San Diego Community College District. In this presentation, we will be discussing Crossing the Chasm, a participative approach to developing a framework for scaling OER adoption. What is OER? OER, Open Educational Resources, are teaching, learning, and research resources released under an intellectual property license or public domain, which permits their free use and repurposing by others. We use OERs at our institution in the form of free textbooks or educational materials to offer our students free resources. So they don't have to necessarily buy a textbook that might be very expensive. So we use these OERs to make student access, to improve student access, to make textbooks more affordable. So we found some good use on this in our campus. We're still in the beginning stage of our faculty adopting this innovative resource. What we see here is a standard bell curve, and you'll see different segments, and this is part of the diffusion of innovation concept, where certain groups will decide to adopt innovation in their own way. And what we'll talk about is how each of these groups adopts innovation using the diffusion of innovation and the stages they go through. So there's also another concept about crossing the chasm. So we're discussing here from left to right, there's different segments of a group or a market. In our situation, it is our institution, where we have faculty members adopting OER that will provide them free to their students. So we have in our institution innovators, early adopters that are using OERs. So we have about 15% of our faculty are using regularly OERs. So we quite haven't gotten to the early majority stage where almost half of our faculty are using them regularly. And so there's this gap between the early adopters and the early majority. And that's the chasm, as it's termed. And we're trying to bridge that chasm and get to that next big segment to adopt OERs. There is a difference in the segments, and if we look at the two segments in between, the early adopters and the early majority, the two segments that border the chasm, if we look at early adopters, they have a different reason why they would use OERs or adopt OERs for the first time. Early adopters seek a change agent. They expect a radical discontinuity between the old ways and the new, and are prepared to champion this cause against expected resistance. So they see OERs, they see the reasons why they want to do it, and they adopt them, and they use it because there's something that they want to change in the way that they do things right now. So they might just like it for the change itself, but there's something that they're not seeing as totally satisfying their situation, so they choose to use OER, okay? Whereas the early majority, if we look at this segment specifically, and we'll not discuss the late majority or laggards today, but we'll focus on this, getting this early majority to also adopt and choose to keep using OERs. That's our goal. So why does the early majority choose to adopt innovation? The early majority want productivity improvement. They don't necessarily just want change for change's sake. They're looking to have productivity improvement in their job. They are seeking to minimize discontinuity. They seek evolution rather than revolution. So what does that mean? That means that if they're teaching their classes, they're having students, they want to see some type of improvement in their situation. That means they want to have more access for their students to get the textbooks. They want to see retention rates go up. They want to meet more of their objectives in their classes. So they're looking to see OERs create some type of productivity improvement before they decide to adopt that innovation. So there is this chasm in between these two segments, and this is one of the most challenging ones to get past, because there's two different reasons why these groups adopt an innovation like OER. So we're going to focus on this chasm today and how we can get past that. So if you want to use an image, it's like going on a bike and going over a jump. And in this case, it might be a big gorge, right, that you're trying to get over and across. And it can be intimidating to move the innovation through the early majority and get them to use and decide to use it and confirm that they enjoy the OER use. So for our institution, we feel like we are on this great launch of innovation adoption. And so we want it to be a successful launch, and we want to land safely by having our early majority adopt this OER and confirm that they do enjoy and it is increasing productivity. So one example I want to just share with you is an innovation that was never successfully improved upon. And if you look at your keyboard, you're probably seeing the same keyboard as what I'm showing here from a vintage typewriter. You see the QWERTY keyboard, which if you look at the top left letters, it's QWERTY, QWERTY. So that hasn't changed. If you look down at your keyboard, it's probably the same one, right? So why has this not changed? So I took a photo of my keyboard, and here it is. It's still got the QWERTY, standard QWERTY keyboard. In the 1930s, someone named Dvorak sought to make improvements on the keyboard, and instead of having the numbers letters randomly placed around the keyboard, he organized the letters so you see all the vowels here, A, O, E, U, I on this row, and all the most common consonants, D, H, T, and S on this line as well. So 70% of the most commonly typed letters are on that middle row for the Dvorak keyboard, whereas only about 32% of the most commonly typed are on that middle row, the standard QWERTY keyboard. So thus improving the amount of times that your fingers would have to leave that middle row in order to type, and also alternating vowels to consonants, because most often times when you type a word, it would be vowel consonant, vowel consonant. So this is not always the case, but it has some productivity improvements here. This innovation never took off. We could learn the Dvorak keyboard and probably increase our productivity, but it might take months to learn how to do it and actually go from abandoning the QWERTY way of doing things and then slowly improve. And we would all see improvements if we adopted this Dvorak keyboard, but we have not. So when we use the analogy of the jumping the chasm, it can be a scary approach because we don't know if everyone's going to adopt it, even if it is a better solution than what currently exists. So what we're looking at today is the 5 stages in the decision innovation process. And this is the model of process of diffusion of innovation. So what we're talking about in this presentation is the focus on the early majority and the 5 stages. And the 5 stages someone goes through in deciding whether they're going to adopt some innovative resource is knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation. So if you think about an individual within a social system, in this case an institution, it would likely be a faculty that wants to use OER. If somebody doesn't know anything about OER, they've got to learn about it. They've got to be persuaded about it. They actually have to decide they're going to do it. And even when they decide to do something, they still actually have to choose to do it, implement it, and then they'll look back on their decision and confirm that it was a good one or not. And so this is the process that people usually go through in any decision. If you think about buying a car or anything that's very valuable, you likely can identify with each of these stages walking through this decision-making process. So what we're talking about is not necessarily the individual, but the group or the segment of an institution that is making this decision collectively. So how do we work the early majority through this decision-making process? And that's what we're doing today, is we're assuming that other institutions are similar to ours and that we're crossing the chasm, we're at a similar point. So you may have moved beyond the chasm. You may have 50% of your faculty using OER regularly and love it, so you may have gone beyond us. But this presentation assumes that we're discussing an institution that's right at that point where they're taking that leap and going across the chasm. We also assume that there are 5 stages in the decision innovation process. There is some argument that there might be more or less, but we are using this model in this presentation. So our objectives for today in this presentation is to understand and practice developing an OER framework for moving an early majority through the decision innovation process. And we will also develop a custom framework to scale OER adoption for a higher educational institution. So in our case at SDCCD, we will actually come up with a framework for moving the early majority through the decision to adopt this innovative resource, OER. And we will make our framework accessible to other institutions so that they can use it and modify it for their institution. So looking a little bit more closely here, we've got the 5 stages. Let's go over those briefly. I mentioned it a little bit before, but in this specific situation, we're talking again, not about an individual making a decision, but about a group, a segment of an institution that can be convinced to use OER, decides on their own, and then confirms that the decision was a successful one and will reuse it. So let's go over each of these. So for the first stage, knowledge, it would be for the would-be adopter. Is first exposed to the innovation and seeks further information regarding OER. So OER is explained to them. They're shown where the information is and what it is and how it could be useful. At this point, they're just saying, hello, we have OER, it's available. And the faculty will say, all right, that sounds interesting, tell me more. If they're at that point where they're seeking more information, they're moving beyond the knowledge phase, and now they are aware that OER exists. So that's the first thing, just making it appear on their radar. At the second stage is persuasion. They're typically asking for more information. And so one of the goals here is to convey the benefits of adopting OER. So this is where somebody is getting more information and they're trying to be persuaded into using it. And this doesn't mean, a hard sell. This means providing the information so they can get to the next stage, which is the decision. Once they go past the persuasion stage where they're saying, yeah, I kind of see where it's good, I really need to make a decision. Once they move past that, they will be actively weighing the pros and cons of adoption. If you think about a faculty deciding to use OER, they're likely just about to start their semester and they're looking at textbooks at this case, right? So they might have an OER textbook and they might have a regular textbook from a publisher, and so they would be weighing the pros and cons. They might see the open educational resource textbook is free to students, which students would love, but they might find that the published textbook has all the quizzes and lesson plans and everything all combined with it, and so they would weigh the pros and cons of making that decision. So even if you are at the decision stage, until you actually put your finger on the OER and put it into your syllabus as this is the book that you're going to be using for your class, you won't be moving beyond the decisions stage. But once you move on with that decision to use OER, you're implementing, you're actually using it in the classroom, and you've moved to stage 4. After you've used it, let's say for a semester, you've used that OER and you've committed to using it, you try it out, you see if it works good. You're probably going to think back to your times when you didn't use OER, you used the classic textbook, and you're going to weigh it against this new innovation resource that you're using. And you're going to move to stage 5, confirmation. You're going to determine for yourself, was it successful and will I use it in the future? So when we're talking about a group of faculty. It's everyone collectively saying, hey, let's implement this, and let's all determine whether we are confirmed whether it was good or not. So let's imagine you get to stage 5. You've used it. You might be kind of hesitant about adopting OER because it didn't work quite great for you individually, but you might get some feedback from all your other faculty saying it improved retention rates or grades, and you see the benefits of it. So collectively, you might decide that OER would be continuing, and you might be encouraged to keep using it as OER gets better. The resources available to you are improved over time. Okay, so this is a walkthrough of the stages. So one of the things we want to focus on is this early majority. Crossing the chasm is focused on this early majority, is getting this specific segment to decide to use OER, implement it, and then confirm that they are actually enjoying it and their benefits, and they will continue to use it in the future. So some of the concepts we want to think about this segment, the early majority, is they are often pragmatists, right? They are often harder to win over to use a new innovation because they want to see that productivity increase. But once they're won over and they like it, they're often very loyal and they will continue to use it. They tend to be vertically oriented and communicate more within their own industry or community, which means they're often talking with their own types of faculty members. So if you're in a math department, you would talk to other math departments, or they might look at other faculty from different schools at a workshop or professional development. Whereas other groups might, go to different workshops entirely, or even different conferences. So often the early majority kind of stay within their either institution or social group or community to look about adopting new innovative resources. They do prefer to keep communication to a minimum number of channels, so they often read the same blogs or go to the same conferences. So in this case, you might have a harder sell because you're working with a group that sees that evolutionary change. So that's why they often wait until the product is proven. They might know about OER, but until they're hearing really good success stories from within their group, they might be hesitant to adopt it until there's kind of a collective push to move forward. They often don't want to hear about the latest and greatest. They just want to know that it works. They'd rather hear industry standard rather than state of the art. So understanding this early majority, the segment, bringing on the early majority takes patience and time, and it could be a long-term agenda. So you need to have patience when moving this segment into adopting, and because if you move it too fast, you're going to be the bike that crashes and burns on this leap, right? So you want to make sure you do it right. You stage it at an appropriate amount of time where it's a successful leap. That way, when the early majority tries it, they have a good experience and decide on their own that it's worth doing again. So in our presentation, the handouts that we do have the framework here, and we've provided prompts for each stage. So you'll see at the top we have knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation, and we talk about 5 components within it. So we talk about the who, why, what, how, and when. So who are the important stakeholders? Why would that early majority decide to move to the next stage? What actions will the institution take to move that early majority to the next stage? How will we know that if we're successful in moving past the stage? And when is the stage complete? So if we're creating a framework in moving this early majority into adopting and confirming that they enjoy this resource, this is what the framework looks like. It's a little complicated, but let's simplify it up. We will simplify it in just a minute. And so it would look like this. That would be a blank framework. But before we get into this, some of the factors to consider are the influences, how an institution can facilitate this diffusion of innovation, impediments, things that impede this adoption, channels of communication, the impact of time, not on just the decision-making process, but also on the institution. Rewards to complete the stage, and so this might be not necessarily just for the faculty, that early majority, but also it could be for the institution or stakeholders that are helping faculty to move it on. What are the rewards to adopt this innovation? How will we measure success, and any additional considerations? So there are more details in the handouts that we will be providing for each of these factors, but these are important to think about as we're discussing this framework. So you'll see the blank framework here. And so what we're showing in this presentation is us developing this framework that we're going to be adopting for our institution. But again, it will be made accessible to your institution where you can design it yourself. So we've gone and we've figured out how we know we will be successful for each stage, and we've filled those in, and we've also determined that we're going to leave the when or how long each stage will take until after we meet with more of our stakeholders. And so we want to identify some of the stakeholders and what interests them to make sure that we have enough time. So we're going to leave those two blank right now. We're going to leave those two sections filled in or a TBD to be determined for later. So today we're not focused on the how and when yet, but we will be looking at the end result of what we want to know to be successful in order to complete the other stages. So each group that we will break into is going to be looked at who are the most important stakeholders for each stage and why that early majority would move to the next stage and what actions we will take specifically. As a group, we would like to collectively, so if we're breaking into 5 groups, the whole collective group seeing this presentation, if we can just take a minute to get warmed up in developing this framework, we would look at across each of the 5 stages, are there stakeholders that would be common through each of the decision-making stages? So knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation. So if we're seeking to get that early majority to go through all 5 stages, what stakeholders would be important for us to focus on? So I can state that it would probably be the faculty that would be important because you're trying to move them through. That could include the academic senate would be an important stakeholders. You might have deans or program chairs that would be important in your institution. You might have a vice president of instruction that you may want to get on board to move this through. So here we would identify all the common stakeholders. And when we go into each stage and we break up into groups, now we have identified some of the common ones, but each stage might have additional stakeholders that might help to have us move through one specific stage that might be independent from the others. So once we've identified all the common stakeholders throughout, let's split up into groups, and in this case 5 groups for each stage. And we will focus on any component that needs to be added on or edited from what we had worked on collectively, and also filling in the why and what components. So once the framework is complete, we will make it available to all the attendees, and that way they can look at what we've done for our institution, but they can also edit, change, modify, and adapt basically this OER, Open Educational Resource, for themselves. All right, I hope you have appreciated this presentation. Thank you for our participation and taking the time to learn about this framework.